Nećemo mi svoje živote rizikovati zbog njih.
Ovo su naši prijatelji. Ja znam Rivku još od bila.
Oca ti više ne znaš. Gdje ćeš? Šta hoćeš? Hoćeš da nas sve pobiju ovdje? Dođeš! Izete!
Zejneba Hardaga je tu. Stoj! Rekao sam stoj!
I want to start by kind of delving into your background a little bit because it's this is very personal to you. I mean, the stories you tell are often of a personal nature just because of what you've been through and who, and where you come from and everything that involves all of that. And I mean, you started in the documentary world and documenting you going back to your homeland. And then you kind of slowly have kind of evolved into the narrative aspect of it. Talk a little bit about this evolution for you and making movies about personal subject matter.
Oh, that's such a great question. Not many people ask me about that. Thank you. So I really started in theater. I was a theater nerd as a teenager, and
nice.
and my undergrad is in theater directing, and I moved to New York to do theater, and I was doing this very experimental off Broadway, like in a basement in Brooklyn.
The best kind of theater, actually.
I think so. And when I was doing theater, I was also not processing the trauma that I had been through. It was a survival mechanism. The war happened when I was a teenager, and the only way I could survive it is to completely ignore it and push it aside. Then the war ended, but I still, I was still in that survival mode. So, most of my, I did touch upon here and there in my theater work, but it wasn't until back to Bosnia, until that documentary, that I really started analyzing, what happened to me and my past. And, since then, and then, that film triggered all that, and I went into it. And by the time I finished editing and put it out in the world, I was tapped. I wasn't ready. I was basically doing immersive therapy without a therapist, and so it was very triggering and traumatizing to relive all that. And so I ran away as fast as I could, in a way, in the opposite direction. So most of my early film work wasn't about Bosnia, really. It was, I wrote some stuff here and there as in screenplays, but making films, I was just exploring other ideas, kind of not really having a clear theme that I was, or it wasn't clear to me at the time. I was just sort of interested in different genres, and any story that came to my mind, I was like, oh, let's do that, and I had all these actors that I was doing theater with beforehand, and I would just write and put up we would do shorts and weekends. I had a day job, so I'd save a little bit of money, or put in my credit card, like how everybody starts. And it wasn't really until I went to film school. So I went to USC for my master's, and they're very much about, write what you know and tell stories from your background, and really, really pushing us to do that. And I was, by that point, I had gone to therapy officially. I actually found a therapist and went through, and healed a lot of the trauma that I processed a lot of trauma. I healed a lot of PTSD that I was dealing with. And so I was like, who cares? Like, that was so long ago, and Bosnia, Americans don't even know where it is on a map, let alone what happened, And I was like, who cares? But they kept pushing and pushing. And I was like, okay, if that's going to get me a good grade, sure, I'll write a script about it, And then as I was exploring it, I got more and more interested, and it made me realize that it wasn't about me processing my trauma through my work anymore, how it was with my doc, that it was really about me using my experiences to help other people process their trauma when they watch my work, and I think that's sort of a switch and an evolutionary path for me. I also was sort of subjected to this idea that to be a true artist, you have to be full of angst and, dark thoughts and depression. And those are the best artists, the ones who drink themselves to death, right? And so, during my time of not processing my trauma, I was very much in that boat. And I was like, oh, I'm really a true artist, And, but then when I really started going into the subject matters that are very close to me and very close to what happened to me and my family, and whether it's about Bosnia or some other subjects, I realized that as a healed person, as a healed artist, I could tap into those themes and ideas in a way that it wasn't triggering, that it was instead healing, both for me and for the audience. And so it's been a really wonderful way to explore those things. And sure, I mean, sometimes they're dark, sometimes they can have an uplifting ending, but I think it's really important for us as people to not shy away from our darkness. And I really hope that by putting my trauma on display, people can be encouraged to look into their own dark corners of their minds.
And with this film, you added a layer to it, which is because there's a certain responsibility with telling somebody's real life story as a narrative. Even how much did you want to concentrate on having that responsibility? How much did you feel like I need to really stay true to the story, and how much did you feel like, well, there's some creative license I need to take and kind of make it work as a narrative? Where was the balance there for you?
Yeah, it was actually a pretty tough balance for me to reach, because, as you said, my first film was a documentary, and part of the reason why I only made one documentary and didn't really go back into it is because I'm an extreme empath, and for me to hear someone's story and then either not use it or cut it up and just use sound bites that serve my story felt so dishonest, and it's easier for me to not feel guilty when I'm manipulating a story that I wrote, rather than someone's life story. I find that really hard for me to accept if I, maybe involuntarily change their story because it fits my narrative better, And so coming to this, on one hand, there's very limited information about what actually happened, and there's almost no information about these people, who they were as individuals, because they're dead, and their descendants who knew them, the ones that might have known them, really, they couldn't reach when I was writing a script. Since then, I got in touch with Zejneba's son, and so I was kind of left to, okay, I know what happened, I know the plot, but I don't know who these people were. And so I had to imagine, and, for a lot of, Zejneba's character specifically, I based a lot on my late grandmother, who more or less inspired me to do this film. And then, the other characters, I was like, okay, well, what would be realistic how people would behave in 1940s in a traditional Muslim household or a traditional Jewish household, and then even as far as the plot, there's so much more to the story. It's a much more complicated story. And so when I first started writing, it suddenly was like, a feature. And the grant, and we had money just to make the short. So I was like, okay, so I'm going to use this short really as a way to launch the story into the world, and then maybe down the line someone will give me money to tell the whole story. But in the meantime, I just wanted to really focus on the crux of the story, which to me was humanity at the core in all of us, and especially, things that we are capable of doing when faced with really difficult situations, and an inspiration to all of us to see very ordinary people, not anyone who has a lot of power or, is super connected or extraordinary in some way. They end up being extraordinary by what they're doing, but, these are ordinary women who don't, especially women at that time, they don't have a lot of power. And I felt that it was an important thing to focus on so that we can all be inspired to do the same thing should it happen to us, you know?
I mean, yeah, I mean, history keeps repeating itself, especially in that region. So
everywhere. I mean, I don't think it's, I mean, sure, it's about wars, right? But I feel like in very divisive times that we live in America, you know, people are like hating on their neighbors because they voted differently than they did. I mean, that's crazy, you know? And, you know, and so if it keeps escalating the way it's been going in the last, you know, 5-10 years, like we could face a situation in which you're protecting your next door neighbor, your friend, from a horde of people who want revenge for something really ridiculous, you know? So I don't think it's war connected. I think it's connected to otherisms, you know, and people being us versus them and that sort of stuff.
You know, something that really struck me about this film that I really appreciated is how natural it felt. Like the lighting felt very natural. Lot of like daylight, you know, creeping in. But there's an awesome scene where they're at dinner and you pan in through the window, and it's just like little things like that. Did you feel like that? The authenticity was paramount for that, or was that just a necessity out of the budget that you had to create kind of that atmosphere?
No, we were very conscious of it. I mean, I worked with my DP, with Alan, and we, from the beginning, the lookbook that I gave him and the ideas that I had were very much authentic, naturalistic. I said, you know, I want people to feel like they're in their house in 1941 Bosnia, you know, and then in the 90s, of course, you know, and so we worked with this Zejneba, who was our production designer, to really, you know, if we have light, it had to come from a window or a practical that we could see in a frame, you know, and so she went out of her way to find authentic practical lights that would have existed. And then, you know, like in a basement in 1993, it's such a quick scene, so you may not see it, but basically they had to improvise about how they're going to have light because there's no electricity, you know, even back then. And then for us was like, okay, it's a dark basement and we have to light it, and there's no practical, there's no light, you know, there's no window, there's nothing. And so we use these, basically they're like pieces of wick that you put in oil. And then that's hanging. And we actually, you know, this is what I love about Bosnia, you know, you can actually hang that and not have to deal with fire hazard. You don't have to have, you know, it's like there are rules that I'm so used to in America. I was like, no, we're faking that. They're like, no, that's not going to be authentic. Like it has to be real. So we hung that and told actors to beware of not running into them. And, you know, so yeah.
Were the actors aware of the history? You know, you shoot this authentically through Bosnian lenses and using, you know, actors of, you know, I don't know if they're all of Bosnian descent, but I would assume some of them were. You know, you use European actors in this, and I'm curious if they were all kind of aware of this, and how much did they add to the process for you? How much did they give to this film?
There's 2 actors in the film who are from Croatia, neighboring that couple.
I figured that it wasn't all.
But everyone else, and then the actor Rashad, who plays the American who comes in at the end. He's an American, but he lives in Bosnia now. He married a Bosnian woman and he's lived there forever. And so, but everybody else was Bosnian, and I really insisted on that. That was very important to me. And the 2 Croatians that snuck in because they're my friends and I wanted to cast them. I was like, please, you know, I'll sneak him in and close enough. But it was really interesting because none of them really knew the story, you know, of Zejneba. Like it's not a very known story, which breaks my heart. I mean, she did such, you know, she not only saved the Kabidos, but she also saved a bunch of other Jewish families who were also their neighbors because they lived in right across from a synagogue. So there were a lot of Jewish neighbors they had. And she risked her life over and over to save them. And it's crazy to me that her name has been completely forgotten out of the Bosnian zeitgeist. And I really hope that this film fixes that, that people talk about her more. And, I was telling, when we were making the film, I was like, she deserves a street named after her at least,
Yeah.
But in terms of having actors who are authentically Bosnian, that was very important to me, because a lot of them had lived through because they were specifically also from Sarajevo. So they lived through the siege in the 90s. And so I relied a lot on them, because I'm from the northern Bosnia. And so my wartime experience wasn't a siege, it was a different kind. And so all I knew about the siege is what I saw in other movies. And so for the sake of authenticity, we talked about already, I turned to them and said, okay, how was it? That's how I knew how they lit the basement. I wouldn't have known that, and so they all contributed their own stories. And then we tried to replicate some of that stuff, and especially in the background actors and giving them direction and that sort of stuff.
And making this authentic beyond just lighting it, with a small budget. I have to imagine there was tremendous challenges wardrobe wise. I mean, creating a 1940s atmosphere and then switching into the 90s, all of that, and doing it seamlessly like you've done. Talk a little bit about the challenges that you faced as a filmmaker, and how was there something specific that you overcame that helped kind of actually give it credence and make it authentic for you?
I love that you as a fellow filmmaker understand that $40,000 is a small budget for this film.
Especially what you're doing. Yeah,
I know, because like most people are like 40 grand. Are you crazy? You can like almost buy a car with that, right? I mean, like what? That's not a small budget, But like trying to, and I had so many background actors, and and also while shooting in Bosnia was great because the dollar goes far, and locations we didn't need to replicate. Yeah. They don't have. I mean, during the war, basically all of their like costume or prop resorts, like budget storage houses, were destroyed. So there were no uniforms we could rent. There was no authentic 1940s costumes we could rent. There were, the props that we found, we went to antique stores and negotiated a price to borrow them. My production designer did. So there isn't this idea how we have in America that you just go to a prop house and you rent a whole bunch of stuff. And, like the gun, I mean, like just, a little tidbit, like when the guns that the Nazi soldiers have, we only could find, it wasn't about renting, it was about finding it. So we could find 2, but we had 6 soldiers. So my production designer like made them out of wood and painted them black. And then like, and she's like, okay, use those in the back so they're not in the front, but they're just walking by, and she has like all the other stuff. And, she had to build the uniforms. There was no uniforms to rent. So she built them. And so she was making a lot of it from scratch, which is very time consuming and also, expensive. I mean, really, when you think about it, it's cheaper to rent a dress for like $50 than to make one. So we definitely ran into those challenges. Also, a good example is the Cabildo house. I was like, okay, it's more important for us to have a house that looks like it's been bombed out, and then we'll figure it out. So we found a location. My producer, Kerim, found a location that was perfect because it was basically a house that was bombed out in this last war in the 90s and never fixed. So part of the house was kind of, and so we said, okay, we're going to shoot in there, but it was empty. It was just, an empty house. And so when you see that scene, everything in that scene, she brought in. So she found every little detail and made it look like it's lived in, like this family has lived there for many generations, that it wasn't, and so stuff like that. I'm very detail-oriented filmmaker, and I like working with both production designers, costume designers, DPs who understand that and who, will go out of their way to think of every little thing, as opposed to, there's people who are like, who cares? No one's going to see it. I'll see it. So it's
and it'll drive you crazy for the rest of your life.
Exactly. It's like there is a piece of white wall behind her. Why? And so yeah. So I really, I mean, I the budget was very, very tight, and I was extremely fortunate to have met Adissa, the production designer, who could pull a rabbit out of a hat with no money. I mean, it was really remarkable, and especially when it came to background, because I didn't use I used a casting agency for the background actors, and so but they sent them without telling them what the film was about. So like 40 people show up, and they're all and it's really hot, and they're like in flip-flops and crop tops and have, pink nails and purple hair. And I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this person,
Right.
And so, and of course, none of them, they weren't told that it was a period piece. So they didn't bring even shoes, closed-toe shoes, or, I mean, you can pull something out of your closet that could possibly pass for 1940s, and then we can adjust it with detailing. But not like I said, I mean, they came in like sundresses. And so Adissa would just she was like, okay, how many are we going to see in this shot? And I would tell her, and she would dress those people. And then when we changed the angle, she would take the clothes off of those people and put it in somebody else in a different combination. She'd be like, okay, this is like this skirt and this shirt, so I'm going to use this. And she would just redress another set of extra background actors. And then like they would walk through in the same clothes, but you wouldn't know because they're in a different. So stuff like that. It was really trying to figure out how to make it work.
The perils of being an indie filmmaker.
Yeah, exactly. The things that I don't know if the studio, filmmakers even remember that part of their journey.
Right. Yeah. Something like this, something that's personal to you, and it's not directly personal to you, but it is your heritage. So I'm curious, with a film like this, what did it give you that you didn't expect? What do you feel like this film has left on you personally that you would have never thought in a million years that's the case?
It's interesting. I think that the biggest gift this film has given me is to teach me to trust my films to tell me what they need versus me pushing into them how I think they should happen or what I think. This was a very I like to control, right? Right. And so I came in with specific ideas, either about how I want to do a certain shot or how many actors I have in the scene, or, even a location and that sort of stuff. And then we would show up, and of course, inevitably things would go wrong and you couldn't do it the way you wanted to do it. And, and usually, in previous films, like I would adjust on the fly, but there would be a part of me that would just go, I really would, if I don't, like I compromised, but I wasn't happy about it. And on this film, what became very clear to me, and I can't even think of a specific example that really switched my brain into this, but it was sort of a collection of different things, that whenever I quote unquote compromised, the solution was a million times better than what I initially came in with. And this was early, even in pre-production process, in casting process. And so I started really trusting that. And so when we would show up on set and we would get shut down for some reason, or police would show up, or whatever the reason, I wouldn't panic. I just had this moment of, okay, this is what this film wants. This is, I used to say, like, it's Zejneba watching over from wherever, and saying, like, I'm the one telling the story. This is my story, And so it really taught me to trust that. And it's been a very good lesson, especially with this film going on in the world, because, for every film festival that rejects us, that usually I would have a meltdown over, especially if it's something I really wanted, I would just say to myself, like, oh, Zejneba didn't want to go there, so it's okay, and I don't know. I mean, I really love that approach to it, and really because I always think of my films as my children, and you
Yeah.
know, and we all want to control our children well into their adulthood and beyond,
Yeah.
you know. And but I think like the same as with kids, you know, at some point, the moment that they develop their own personality, you have to listen to that. And I
Yeah.
feel like this film definitely taught me how to do that.
What does it mean to you to be an independent filmmaker? What do you love about indie film?
What I love about making films independently is the freedom that it gives me in telling the stories that I want to tell the way I want to tell them. Of course, you compromise in everything. And of course, with not having as much money as you do when you're working in the system. But with money comes, you know, it's golden handcuffs, right? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, I mean, whoever gives you the money becomes the controller of the story. And, you know, for me to be able to tell these stories in a way that I feel are authentic and true, and, you know, and not compromise that for the sake of commerciality or sensationalism or, you know, any of the things that usually sell movies, is really important to me. And, you know, it's on the other hand, it's really hard, right? I mean, we're always scraping the bottom of the barrel. And, you know, I mean, I keep explaining to my parents that, you know, I will be able to live off of what I do for a living eventually at some point. Just trust me. You know, so I hope that independent cinema finds its way back into the financing system. You know, we were there in, you know, starting with the 70s and then, you know, against like 90s, turn of the century, but we sort of slipped out again, you know, and now it's again to like, you know, you're just putting things on credit card and applying for some random grant. And of course, since America doesn't have, you know, funding for the arts, officially government funding for like Ministry of Culture, like every other country that I can think of. You know, we're very much reliant on, you know, grants and then some financier who's willing to just give us their money and not care if we don't make it back.
Yeah.
You know, but I really hope that the system, maybe with these strikes and everything, there's going to be a shift to where independent cinema is again heralded and sponsored in a way that we can make it sustainable. Because as wonderful that freedom is, it doesn't always mean that you can actually keep doing it.